Happy Monday. It is cold. -1 was the departure temperature when I left for work. I usually keep gloves in my car. They weren't in my car. I set them by the door, forgot them. I live a couple floors up in an apartment, so just popping back in to get them is very doable, but inconvenient. Man, I scraped my car, which I did yesterday, but it iced over again overnight. And I spent maybe, couldn't have been more than 5 minutes scraping. I have not had that kind of reaction on my fingertips for a long time. Of just, like, losing feeling quick and that numb feeling, and like so much so we're getting in the car I had to be mindful of like how quickly I wanted to try and heat them up for blood flow reasons and safety reasons. It was bad. So yeah, it's wild. This is, at least in Kansas City, and I know a lot of other parts of the country, this is for sure the type of weather that people freeze to death in. So it definitely makes me grateful to have a vehicle, have a warm office, have a warm home, to not go about my day at all worrying about freezing to death. And we don't have a huge homelessness problem in my town. I say Kansas City a lot for people watching that aren't local. I don't actually live in Kansas City. I live next to it. I'm very close to it. But one of the outside towns. Kansas City is the city proper. But I live on the Kansas side, and we don't have a lot of homelessness issues in my county, in my town, but you know, I think about it every time I pass someone in this type of weather. It's, I don't know the statistics, but I wonder that every time we get this type of freezing is, how many of my neighbors or community might have died, and it sucks. So yeah, man. Anyway, it's cold. And cold is not the point of the video. And apologies in advance for the audio. I left my microphone at home. And that is what it is. Maybe I should have a backup one just in the office at all times. That wouldn't be a bad idea, I don't think. Yeah. It is, man, this wasn't, I'll talk about this instead. I'll carry on to the last comment. Just gratitude. I've talked about that a lot, but I think perspective can help so much. I've talked about perspective, I've talked about gratitude, but just anytime things aren't going well, seemingly, just the reminder to me of how much worse things can get. And I don't like to do this, it's not that type of dismissive thing. Well, it's like, oh, people have it worse than you, so you should just be happy. There's such a balance to that. Like, I don't know that that's always the best thing to tell kids or someone who's grieving. Oh, at least it wasn't this. But if you're not overly emotional, like, I'm not overly emotional scraping my car. I'm like, oh, it's freaking cold outside and this sucks. I'm not having a huge emotional moment. But in that moment, I also think, man, and I'm only out here for 5 minutes. I'm not going to risk dying. I'm not concerned about dying. I'm not concerned about having medical issues due to the cold. It's comments like that. You didn't make as much money this month. Again, I've talked in previous videos, if you make $60,000 a year in the U.S., you're in the top 1% of earners globally. Things might be hard, but maybe think twice before complaining. Moments like that of getting home in the evening, it's like there's no fire to put out. Even if I have a bad day of work, I think about my worst days of work that I've ever had. And even those, I would, they're way better than a lot of people's day to day. So there's just a lot to be grateful for in life. And I think it's really helpful to take time whenever we're struggling to not get into this comparison game, but to be mindful of what life could be like and what we have instead. Because we start to compare to what we don't have all the time. We compare to neighbors. So if you move into a nicer neighborhood than you originally lived in, now you're comparing to the nice things your neighbors have. We have neighbors that have maybe nicer cars than us or nicer gadgets or other stuff like that. Well, it wouldn't even be on my mind if we were in a worse neighborhood. So when you're like, oh, I have the best in this comparison, or I have the worst in this comparison, and if you move to Beverly Hills and you got the worst house in that neighborhood, you might constantly be like, oh man, I'm not. Look at me compared to my neighbors. I have a small house and I only have a couple cars or whatever. A lot of life is comparison, and it can be helpful, but I think you need to think about when and how that's helpful, and when and how it's not. So, and what really matters in life. So I mentioned a minute ago, a lot of our neighbors have nicer cars than us, and I don't really care that much. My car does what I need it to, and that's kind of, in my opinion, that's the point of a vehicle, is it gets you from point A to point B and keeps you safe. And ours drives. It's tiny, but it is decent safety rating, and gets great gas mileage. We get like 36 miles a gallon, so I love it. And we don't have a car payment, so you really want to be mindful of what's necessary in life and what's a want. And I think most of American culture is wants. Pretty much no one is outside of their needs. We have extreme poverty and homelessness, like I talked about a minute ago. We also have a big issue with healthcare. So those situations notwithstanding. But it's also even interesting with how debt works. I mean, people get crippled by medical debt, but also the way that the payment structures work is you can have $500,000 in medical debt and still, in most cases, not have your assets seized to pay for it. I don't think the debt situation is good, and I don't think the medical bills should be that high. And it's also interesting that you can have so much debt and still pay your bills and eat. It's an interesting thing. It's not really an opinion either direction. It's just interesting. So, yeah, that type of positive comparison is fascinating. And I think about, sitting right now at a desk in an office that I rent. Everything in this room I bought. The whiteboard over there, and there's 2 lamps on the floor, were given to me. But everything else in this room, I bought. And I can start getting really nitpicky there. The office space is my office, and it's warm in here. I have a computer that works, and I need to work all day, but even if I have an awful day, I can take a break and play a game on my computer or watch something on my phone, get on YouTube or read a book that I brought with me. It's just like the world's not going to collapse in on itself if I need something, versus think about slavery or extreme poverty or indentured servitude and all this stuff, and people didn't have a choice, and people who break their back to still not pay a bill. It's just hard to complain. That doesn't mean you can't have a bad day or a less than ideal day. It just means, come on. If your car breaks down, if my car breaks down, I'll use me as an example, that's super inconvenient and sucks. My world's not going to end. It just isn't. It's, most of the problems I think I face are inconveniences, and I think a lot more people face inconveniences more than they face threats. And again, depends on where you're hearing this from. Although I would say if you're first world, that's most scenarios for you are inconveniences versus real threats to life. I keep disclaiming, but people are going to find ways to be like, well, what about this? Sure. My point is, can we start from a place of, instead of something happening, to being down and out about ourselves and this kind of like entitled bitterness? Can we start by really assessing what we have? And then go from there. Again, to use the cold example this morning, like, oh, it sucks that I have to scrape the car in the cold. It's amazing I have a car. It's amazing I have warm clothes. It's amazing I have heating where I can get out of the cold quickly. And it's amazing that the utility of the car is to get me to a job that pays my bills to do all those other things. do I prefer a 70-degree day, windows down? Yeah, I prefer it. That's nice. I love it, actually. But it's not going to change the other things I just said, the privileges I have. A moment like this, where it's cold, gives me the opportunity. I have the opportunity to be mindful and grateful of the privileges and access to resources that I have, as opposed to taking that moment and just being bitter and annoyed at the world or the universe for the cold weather, and just mad that I have to deal with it, or entitled like I shouldn't have to deal with the cold in some way, or getting jealous that a neighbor has a garage and I don't, and or that another neighbor might have a push start car that they can start heating it up before they get out to it. Those are opportunities. We have opportunities to decide how we're going to behave and feel about certain things. And I personally would rather be in the habit of letting those moments remind me of how good I have it versus letting those moments remind me of what I don't have. And, I think my life's better for it. And I think there is a little bit of room to acknowledge, to say, a push to start would be nice. I wonder how much it costs to install it in my car. Or a garage could be useful this time of year. I wonder how much that would cost to get. I live at an apartment that has garage options, and we just don't pay for it. So I think you can let it prompt a question of this, if we have the expendable money, could we do it? Is it worth it to let it prompt some thoughts? But if it turns into bitterness and envy and jealousy towards neighbor and resentfulness towards someone else having something, that's super destructive, borderline evil behavior. I think a lot of problems in the world start from people who don't have things looking at people who have and hating them for it. And then we justify violent behavior and aggressive behavior and even subtle insults. This privilege, we have this shadow self that will justify these microaggressions, not in the same way we talk about it with racial issues, but these little things of, I don't have to hold the door open for that person, or I'll shovel the front of this car but not that nice car. Little things, and they get smaller than that, even to just how we smile or not, or how we prejudge someone. And just look for opportunities to do the opposite, and your life's gonna be better all the time. It's just, it's gonna always be better to think of what you're grateful for and what you have versus what you don't have, and to try and think how you can be kind to someone versus not kind. I really can't think of, I can think of moments where it might not go the way you think, or maybe a moment where it would have been better to think through something more on the negative end to protect, but it's so far and few between. And also thinking of gratitude and how you can be helpful to people and how you can be thankful for what you have. You do all this with wisdom. So, sometimes a kind act can be unhelpful because you're thinking actually about yourself with the kind act. And you're thinking oh, let me do this thing, but we don't think about the person. One thing is maybe, someone's planning to get the mail after work. I have a package room. I see my neighbor's package. I'm I'll take it up to their door. I take it up to their door, knock, they don't answer, so I leave it in front of their door. Well, they're anticipating it. They then get home from work, go into the mail room and spend 20 minutes scouring for the package, and they're calling, the package didn't get here, and it's just up by their unit, which packages don't get delivered to our unit. So in that situation, my kind action created inconvenience and problems for someone else, which could have been resolved by just thinking through that a little bit longer of I wonder if this would be helpful. Not just I would like it. It's a great starting place. I think that could be helpful for that person. And if we've done our due diligence and gotten to know our neighbor, we might have their phone number and can text them, hey, found a package for you, I'll take it up to your unit, so that they know, or do you want me to? Or taking it up, knocking, if they didn't answer, going through the hassle of taking it back to the mailroom so that it's where it's supposed to be. So Gratitude on cold days is nice. I mean, I got heat in here, so very little to be discontent with in life, I would say. So, practice it. Your life will be better. I can almost guarantee that. Practice gratitude. Practice not comparing what you don't have, but recognizing what you do have. And practice being thankful. So, that's it. As always, happy Monday. It's good chatting to the screen. Hopefully, humans on the other end of it. And yeah, I'd be curious as you're listening, whether it's the moment I post this or later in different regions of the country or the world. I'd be curious to hear from people what opportunities you have today to be inconvenienced and annoyed and upset and angry and envious and self-righteous and entitled, but instead you'll look at the situation and say, I'm going to choose to be grateful for what I do have. I would love to hear that because people have different opportunities and different perceptions of what counts for those things. Some people don't care at all about scraping a car, and I ultimately don't either. It's just cold, and that's what bothered me today, and choosing to not be actually bothered by it. So yeah, if you got stuff that you have the opportunity to go one direction or the other today, I'd love to hear what those opportunities were and hopefully maybe how you chose to reconsider it and look the other direction. Or if you're listening to this and that happened earlier in the day, I'd love to hear how it went and then maybe in the moment how you're reflecting on, actually, I felt that way, but I could have felt this way instead and thought about this instead. So just fun practice. All right, y'all. As always, happy Monday, and I'll see you next week.